Are you new to the UK and are you trying to figure out how to rent and choose a property? Then in this video, we're going to be doing exactly that. In this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the key factors that you need to think about and consider when you are trying to rent, and what are the key things that you need to be aware of when you are renting. And make sure to stick around till the end of this video, because I'm going to be sharing some of my top experiences and tips when renting a property.
Be strong.
Hi, I'm Arjun and welcome to my channel, The Nimble Nomad, where I share my experiences as a first-generation immigrant and some tips, tricks and hacks for thriving in the UK if you're new to the UK. In this video, we're going to be going into a little bit more detail on how to rent a property and find a home to rent. Specifically, we're going to be looking at what are the key criteria and factors that you need to think about when renting. How do you find the right location for yourself when renting in the UK? And specifically, what are the things that you should think about whether you want to rent privately or whether you want to rent with a flatmate. So let's get into it. Finding a home and renting a property in the UK can be quite daunting, especially when you're new in the country and you don't know anybody or you don't know how the system works. I experienced this 10 years ago when I came to the UK first, and I found it extremely challenging finding a property and finding out what worked for me as a new renter and what didn't, especially because it was my first time renting a new property. So the first thing is basically the criteria. So the most normal and most common mistake that people make when they first move to the UK is they try and find a property which is close to their work or to school. And that in itself isn't the best approach. The reason I say that is because the first time when I moved to the UK 10 years ago, I decided to live really, really close to work. And in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that, because when on the weekend, when I was trying to do something fun, the area was absolutely dead and there was absolutely nothing to do without actually having to travel ages and then find something to do, such as a park or a pub or a restaurant, and meet some of my friends in London. So I think what you need to do in the first instance is write down the criteria that are absolutely critical to you and what is it that's important to you outside of work or school. So whether it's visiting a park, or whether it's having a garden, or whether it's about having a restaurant or other amenities like a gym, a supermarket that's close to you. Or are you going to be basically meeting specific family members or friends that are really, really close to you? Where do they live? Do they live close to where you work? So that is a really important factor. Now, the other thing that you need to think about when you're defining your criteria is, what is the kind of property that you're going to think about? Do you want to live in a flat? Do you want to live in a modern flat? Do you want to live in a Victorian conversion flat? Or do you want to live in a house because you have a big family and you need a garden? So that's the second part of defining a criteria. So I think what is really, really important is writing down these criteria for yourself, which is, what kind of area do you want to be living in, because there are specific things that you absolutely must and should have, and things that you can't live without, and things that you can. And then subsequent to that, what kind of a property that you can find within that specific area. So is that specific area prone to having a lot of flats as opposed to houses? And within that, what is it specifically that you're looking for? So personally, for me, when I first moved in, for me, what was the most important thing was finding a property which was relatively modern and it was close to work. Now, obviously, in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that, and I would have had different factors. But I think writing these down makes it really, really easy to then search specifically for what you're after. So you've defined your criteria and you've written down absolutely what is a must-have and what is something that you can let go of or something that you're flexible on. But the next most important thing is, how much are you willing to spend on that property? Are you willing to go all out, or are you on a budget and therefore you only have limited resources? Now, based on the type of property that you've identified and the area that you want to live in, you want to do a rough search of this online. This can be basically, okay, I want a flat which is modern in basically Clapham. How much does that specifically cost? And that can be anywhere between £1,200 to £500. So now you have a rough estimate of what you might be paying for a 1-bedroom flat in a specific area. So you want to define that for yourself. Now, based on your monthly earnings or monthly budget, you're going to have a different range to me. And that's really, really important. Now, the one thing I would recommend is over and above your rent, you need to factor in other costs such as utilities and council tax and transport. Here in the UK, you have something called the council tax. Now, the council tax is a monthly tax or fee that you pay to the local council, your local area, or the local government that manages the specific area that you're going to be living in. And there are councils for different parts of London and different parts of the UK. Now, this council tax is quite important because it can be really, really expensive in the long term. And it can be as high as almost 15% of your monthly rental. So, and the council tax is different for different parts of the UK. So in some parts of England or in London, the council tax is really low versus others where it's really high. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the area that you're going to be living in is going to be particularly dirty or, you know, poor, but it just means that that council doesn't charge its residents as much. So when I first actually came to the UK and I started renting, it wasn't something I was aware of, so I just rented the property. But as I moved on and I moved into another flat, the council tax was a really, really important factor to me. So I actually found a council where the council tax was the second lowest in all of England. And to be honest, that worked out to be almost half or even 1/3 of what a lot of my friends were paying for their council tax. So it's one of the factors that you want to consider, but it is not the only factor that you may want to consider. So once you've defined that criteria, you need to do some research online based on the property type and the area that you're looking at, and identify what is the approximate range of properties in terms of the monthly cost that you're going to be paying. Now, this is really, really important factor. And on this basis, you can then estimate how much you're going to be spending on a month-on-month basis. My own personal experience with rent and paying for bills is that I would not pay more than 50% of my monthly budget or my income on these things. Now, this can depend based on what your earning power is or what your monthly budget is person to person, but as a maximum or a rule of thumb, I would not exceed over 50% of your budget on rent or rent related expenses such as bills and utilities. Now, this is pretty important and you should factor this in your budgeting. And the other aspect that you want to consider is a place like London is likely to be much more expensive than a place like Leeds, where rent will probably be half of what you will be paying for the same property in London, because London is more crowded. So depending on where you're going, this value of 50% can vary from place to place. So keep that in mind. Also, my own personal experience as both a single man and as a young couple with my wife are quite different. So as a single person, I didn't spend more than 1/3 of my salary on my rent and bills because I wanted to personally save some money. But as a couple, our rent expenses increased because we were renting privately an entire apartment in central London. So that was almost 50% of my monthly income. So this will change based on your personal circumstances, but it's something to consider depending on what your personal circumstances are. You probably have already nailed down whether you want to live alone because of your personal circumstances or whether you want to rent privately. Now, if you're still struggling on whether you want to rent privately or you want to live with somebody else, then the key things that you want to think about are socially, what kind of a person are you? Are you somebody who likes your privacy and don't really like sharing things? Or are you more inclined to meeting new people and sharing resources and spending time with somebody after work or after school? That's an important factor to think about when you're considering actually finding some place to rent. The other bit that you may want to consider when you're thinking about renting is, what is it that's really important to you? Is it the fact that you get your independent space, or are you willing to save money, or do you really want to share a space so that you can split the bills and costs of a private rented property? This is the key factor that will help you determine whether you want to rent privately or whether you want to share a property. Now, thank you for staying with me up until this point on the video. So as a reward, I'm going to share some key bonus points on my personal experiences in renting in the UK. Number one, always pay your rent on time. If you do not pay your rent on time, or if you part pay your rent, then you can have some serious problems later on down the road, because each time you rent a property, especially if you're moving from one rental property into a new one in the UK, your new landlord is going to want a reference letter from the previous tenancy or letting agency. Also, your landlord can complain to the credit agencies when you don't pay your rent on time, and you can have your credit score negatively affected, which can then have implications with being able to find a job and also being able to secure further credit down the road. Compare the benefits of council tax versus transport. Now, I think I touched on this earlier in the video, but council tax is a really important factor, and it adds as an expense on your monthly outgoings. So does transport. Transport in the UK, and especially in London, is not cheap. So depending on how close you are to your office based on the criteria that you've defined, or how far you are, and the council tax that you're going to be paying for the specific area that you've chosen, you want to weigh up the costs so that you've got the best of both worlds, i.e. you're paying less for your transport and you're also not paying that higher fee on your council tax. Or if you're willing to have a lower transport fee and a higher council tax, then that probably works as well. So decide what's important for you and make a decision on that basis. Choose creditworthy flatmates. What happens in the UK is, on a month-on-month basis, the rent is always taken from one account. So if you have a flatmate that is responsible for having the rent come out of his or her account, and he's not going to be contributing to the rent, then you're going to have problems down the road. Or if you've got flatmates that are careless and don't care about the property and are going to damage it, then that's going to affect the deposit that you're paying upfront for the property that you need to live in. Always check the property in person by viewing the property in London or elsewhere in the UK. You do not want to be renting a property just based on the pictures, because you're probably going to be renting this property for a year to 18 months. And if you have problems like poor sound insulation or heat insulation, or really damaged walls or leaky roof, then that can have serious implications in terms of your quality of life. Finally, do not believe what the estate agents tell you. It's not a face value transaction. You do have the power to bargain, but be careful, because the property market in the UK can be competitive for highly sought after properties. So make your decisions wisely. You can bargain on the total rent that you're going to be paying on a month-on-month basis, or you can bargain for specific things to be added to the property. So for example, if the property is not furnished and the landlord's asking for a really high rent, you could say, I'm happy to move in for this rent, but I'd like the property furnished with some basic goods. And sometimes landlords give in. But do not necessarily believe what estate agents say, because ultimately the estate agents are working for the landlord, not for you. So there's nobody in your corner to fight for you, and you need to make sure you get the best deal that works for you. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe. I'll be back with a new video next time. Thank you.